Hello and welcome. I'm Tracey Polowich, host of the Excellence Connection podcast, where we connect our listeners with subject matter experts, knowledge, and resources to help along the excellence journey and make organizational improvements. Today, my guest is Ron Higgins. Ron is a seasoned professional in the excellence community and has significant experience in both the private and public sectors. I look forward to speaking with him today about some of the similarities and differences between applying excellence principles and practices within each of these sectors. Welcome to the show, Ron.
Oh, thank you very much, Tracey, and thank you for having me today. This is going to be a good day.
Yes, I'm honored to have you as a guest. I'm happy that you're able to join. So can you share a little more of your background with our audience?
Sure. I'll go back to the 1970s because that was kind of important for where I am today. Everybody knows about the Nortel downturn. When that happened at Nortel, I happened to be the senior quality manager at the time with a staff of about 38 people. I guess I was the last person standing, but I still had to maintain a quality program within Nortel at the time. Didn't really know, okay, I had 30 some people, now I have none. How the heck am I going to do this? So long story short, what I did was I set up cross-functional teams from each department within the organization, trained them on quality principles and worked with them to go through it. And from there, we would just maintain the program, and it was very successful. So I used that knowledge to take a business course, 1-year business course on how to run a business, and develop my own program. And it was called the Ren Group at that time. The Ren stands for Wendy, my wife, Ron enjoys. So it was called Ren Group, and I only picked contracts that I thought I would enjoy, and that worked out well that way. So I spent about 10 years working. I had about 20 to 25 consultants on contract with different areas of expertise: Six Sigma, process mapping, quality management, different ISO standards, health and safety, that kind of thing. And as I needed each of these consultants within different areas of expertise to help with the quality program, we picked and choose which ones we needed for our clients at that time. From there, I got a contract and partnered up with another company in Ottawa, and we went down to set up an economic development program in the Caribbean. My part of the program is to set a quality management system, set up the secretariat, do the training, do the mapping of the process and procedures, and implement them, and training for sustainability once we left. So that's a little bit about my background in the consulting field. I had issues with trying to get into the government sector, and I guess one of the things I found in the very beginning, which was quite strange, I went in too low at that time. Back in the 70s, I went in at $800. I wasn't getting any contracts. Found out the people who were getting contracts were getting 1,000 to 1,200 a day. So I put my price up to that, and lo and behold, started getting contracts. So I guess price matters when you're trying to represent your credibility. So anyway, I found that strange. I got a lot more money for what I thought I was deserved, but that's another story. Where I was going with that is that once we set up the quality program down in Barbados, I came back. I didn't want to get really back into consulting, so I thought I'd run for mayor in my community and try to learn more about the magic of the public sector, municipal government. And through that, I learned a lot, both the municipal and the provincial government. And we'll go through some of that experiences today. So all that experience is just to provide your audience with a little bit of background about where I'm coming from and what sectors I've worked in, just from credibility when I speak type of thing. So thank you for asking.
Well, thank you for that. And I, interestingly, my husband actually worked for Nortel way back in the early 90s as well, and has always spoken pretty highly of that organization and the experience that he got with them. So
yeah.
You have, as you mentioned, some pretty extensive experience working in both the private and public sector. So I'd like to compare and contrast the two with respect to the adoption of excellence in those types of organizations. So, Ron, how does the approach differ between private and public sector when you're implementing excellence or adopting an excellence program in those organizations?
Very good question, Tracy. I guess I'll start with the private sector first because that's the the easy one. Most when you're in the private sector, most of the requirements defined by the private sector organization are pretty crystal clear. They know exactly what they want, and as a consultant, if you fit their needs, then you make an application and go in and fix their program for them or whatever it is they're asking for. In the private sector, they're accustomed to quality and excellence methodology and terminology. And as a result, it's a lot easier to do an introduction of what it is you want to do for the organization, explain the process, and provide the benefits to the managers that are requesting the work that wants to get done. As well, within a private organizations, most managers have accountability for what it is they want to do within the organization. It's pretty well mandated. Here's your targets. Mostly it's financial or productivity related, or when I say productivity, I include service and products in that. So anyway, the bottom line is the significant factor for the organization, and it's easy to sell the program in a private organization if you have the background within the quality and excellence methodology and understand how you can do improvements for the organization through improving processes and reducing red tape, cutting costs, etc. In the public sector, it's a little bit different. The staff within the private sector are pretty much educated, understand how they connect and what it is they need to do for the whole of the organization. In the public sector, staff are pretty well focused, whatever it is in the area that they're responsible for. And the staff works for a board of directors versus a manager per se. The CIO, the Chief Administration Officer, is the head of the staff within a public sector organization, and I'm referring to municipal government in this analogy. And so the CIO works pretty closely with council, but council is like a board of governors. They have discussions and provide direction, basically defining what the policy is, and the CIO and the staff implement the policy on behalf of the council. So there's a disconnect between the council. They're really not part of the organizations. Normally they're elected every 4 years. Some stay, some change. There's no continuity of an individual perspective on things, and you lose your historical valuable information once you lose a council member. So the process within the staff organization really should rely on organizational excellence and good quality metrics in place to ensure there's continuity between councils as it goes through. The other issue with public sector is it's pretty much high. I guess the voters are your customers, whereas the products coming from the private sector is a product or service. It's pretty straightforward. In the public sector, the service delivery being provided covers a whole range of topics that includes the voters in a number of different issues, and it's complaints driven. Usually, and what I found in the public sector as mayor, once you got just one complaint, you might have 18,000 people. If you get one complaint, there was a lot of effort went through to address that complaint without and a lot of time and effort. So it's a little different. In the private sector, you get a complaint, you address it, you don't escalate it. But usually when you get a complaint that involves a voter, council wants to know about it. So you get top level management involved in complaints and things like that. So there's a bunch of different issues between the two sectors in that way. So the voter has a strong say when it comes to election time specifically, or if you're trying to implement new processes or make change within the community, which I'll get into later on with some other questions. But it's very difficult to implement change or drive organizational excellence if it's not part of the organization to begin with. So I'll leave it there. I hope I answered the question.
Yes, that outlines a lot of the different approaches that it sounds like can be made with between those two industries. Are there different challenges with each of them as well, besides those that you've mentioned so far?
Yes, there's a lot of, there are some other challenges, and that's the provincial and the federal government. I'm going to speak to Ontario today because that's the province I'm familiar with and can speak to it based on my experience and dealings with the governments. The other issue is working in our area. We have 5 municipalities, they're townships and the county. So we have 5 townships and a county government. So when you're doing change across the organization, are trying to implement excellence, it's pretty difficult to start from the top up. So county is the place where all the council members for all townships meet. So you try and pitch it at that level, but then you're into 5 different townships, 5 different councils. It makes it a lot more difficult. So my suggestion in that, if people come across, is versus on a small municipality, not the upper tier, so lower tier, upper tier, normally called townships. So that's one issue. Provincial government in Ontario transferred the responsibility for paramedics down to the lower tier. So each municipality is responsible for the cost to do paramedics and healthcare. And both of those are very, very expensive and take away a lot of money. So trying to implement an excellence program or drive change when there's already strenuous stress on finances, both from healthcare, policing, providing medical response, emergency response, 911, fires, things like that. Doesn't leave a lot of time or effort for organizational excellence. Having said that, each of the organizations I just talked about, like the paramedic services, the response for the fire departments, they pretty well got good programs in place that don't require formalized excellence program. They're driven by regulations and standards and have to comply with those, and that's enough on their plate. Where organizational excellence should happen, in my opinion, as a municipal inspector, is with the senior staff and the council, and work organizational excellence that way. And when I started the program within Frontenac, where I was mayor, when I mentioned the word excellence, there was kind of a fuzzy response that people didn't understand what it was. So you have to basically educate what it is, and more importantly, what the benefits are going to be, and try to manage doing that by showing a benefit that'll improve the relationships with both the upper tier organizations, your cross-functional townships, the provincial government, and the federal government all included. So those are some of the challenge. Another challenge might be neighboring municipalities will be able to implement some programs because they have the flexibility, the education. They might have a larger organization and have the finances to implement organizational excellence. And then when it's happening in a next door neighbor and you see the benefits and the lower taxes going down, then you get some pressure on other organizations. But I want to talk more about that when we close up on how we can work together, not just in Ontario, but across Canada, and implementing organizational excellence.
Okay, great. One of the things that you mentioned is just getting people to the education piece, which I agree. I think there's a lot more that we can do to make the public sector aware of excellence and the benefits that it can bring. And that's why we're at Organizational Excellence Specialists, we're embarking on this public sector initiative to try to bring more awareness. And part of that is this municipal series of videos that I'm doing and podcasts. But one of the things that you mentioned, which I'd like to get your take on, is, we often hear people saying, well, I don't have time, I don't have the money to implement something more and something different. And, one of the things that we promote with the organizational excellence framework and any excellence model, I think, is there are certain things that are really key to be focusing on. And if organizations do focus on those key practices and principles, they will see higher performance. But it's maybe difficult for an organization to trust that there's some things that they can leave behind and then focus more effort and resources on those key things. And so what I'm interested to hear from you is if you were able to achieve success by doing that, and what some examples of that might be in the public and or the private sector.
The private sector and the public sector in this question, I think, are both the same. With any organization, they always have one issue that's costing a lot of money, a lot of time, or is keeping a VP or a CEO awake at night or pissed off, whatever it is. There's something within the organization that can be improved that alleviate senior management's concerns and let them work on some other stuff. You just have to find what that is. I'm going to pick an example that we did in North Frontenac, and it's the provincial and federal governments are reluctant to open up new waste sites. So as a result, when I took over mayor, we had a lifespan of about I'm not going to quote numbers because I can't remember. So I'm just going to use a fictitious number for this example. Let's say 100 years is what we had left in our waste sites, knowing we couldn't add any more land. How the heck was the next generation going to handle getting rid of waste? So we put together a team within the organization, 2 councillors, the mayor, the CAO, and a couple of the managers within their staff, and a couple of on-the-ground members of the organization. And we did sort of a work group, and I led them through the facilitation and process mapped what it is and where all the waste went, the different types of waste, blah, blah, blah. Out of that came a recycle program. And we're proud to say that within the first year, we had an uptake of 55% of our waste being diverted from the waste site and going into the recycle, plastic cans, that type of thing, glass, tires, paper, and metal. All of that was going into our waste site. So that got reduced. There was a significant improvement in the number of years that were now become available on the projection. And again, I can't remember numbers, but it was very significant. And I'll say if we started with 100, we'd probably get up to an additional 35 years within 2 years of implementing the program. And they're still working on other ways of diversion. And as you know, the feds and the province are getting rid of some packaging and stuff like that, that in a rural areas are a huge concern. As far as taking up land in the environment. From an urban perspective, it's the trucking cost and issues, and they're also running out of places of people that will take their waste. So there's some opportunities. That's one example that you can do. We really put a focus on the safety of our area, put together an emergency management program. That's a different story. You're asking me about some significant improvements. So another example we did was the succession planning that I talk about. It's whether you're in a small rural municipality where it's hard to attract high-end talent, or whether you're in a city with millions of people, you're still the people within the public sector are starting to become few and far between. A lot of retirements happening. There isn't enough people coming up through the ranks to fill positions. So what do we do in that area? There's an opportunity to work within organizations there to implement a succession plan with process mapping to improve efficiencies, to avoid adding staff as you go forward. the succession plans, and amalgamation is another way to address the issue, which I'm going to talk about later when we get into regionalization discussions. But there are opportunities. What I would do if I was starting off as a consultant today is I would attend the final meeting of the year and of the township. And what they do at the final end of the year is they go through how they did on performance, whether it's strategic planning or how they really did on the budget. If you attend those meetings or read the minutes of those meetings or the agenda, you can find out what the biggest issue is in an organization. Put together a proposal, do a cold call and say, I understand you have this problem. Here's what we can do for you, blah, blah, blah. That's one approach that people could take. And that applies to the private sector as well. You just have to understand what the issue is. Does that answer your question, Tracey?
Yeah, those are some great examples of, implementing best practices and making those work within the public sector. And that's great. What sometimes the CAO, and you touched on this a little bit earlier, so I want to explore it a bit further. So sometimes like the CAO or even an administrative leader, like a director in a certain department, will have would like to implement an excellence program or model, but they don't have that formal direction or approval, or even maybe the will of the council or even their CAO to do that program. Are there any strategies that these leaders can take to move the organization excellence agenda along without some formal approval or direction?
No, not in the public sector, that's for sure. Staff have to work on stuff that's related to the service delivery, or work on the infrastructure, or look after the health and safety of the community. So they just couldn't ad hocly start working on a program like that without approval of the CAO and council. Anything related to money or the workforce needs council approval, which is one of the reasons there's a lot of red tape in the municipal government, but it's there for a reason. The taxpayers need their money protected, and any of the staff and everybody that's working needs to be focused on what the taxpayers are paying for, and they're not paying to implement an excellence program. They're paying to have the service pick up their garbage, snow plow the roads, make sure there's no potholes, things like that. However, having said that, there's always an opportunity for continual improvement within an organization. If someone has an issue and approach me with about it and say, how do I do that? I would sit down with the person in the organization and together, make sure their manager approves, obviously, put together what I would say is a cold call proposal or a program or a presentation for council to look at. So understand what the issue is, identify how that issue can be improved, how it's going to be measured, and at the very end, what's the cost improvement or what's the cost savings for the community as a result. And that way it's related to saving money for the taxpayer, and council really will have a better opportunity to prove that if it's a good proposal. How you introduce that through council is you set up a delegation. It's usually most municipalities allow people to come in and provide a presentation council on whatever it is they want to present. So that would be the way to get council's attention on a program that would help them, staff, and the community. So I think that's, to me, that's about the only way you could implement something that the staff feels an issue, but can't get approval to work on it.
Another challenge in municipal government is the election cycle, and you touched on this a little bit briefly before as well, and the potential turnover of elected officials every 4 years. How can municipalities maintain momentum in continuous improvement efforts with that potential turnover of the council and a potential change in strategic direction in those 4-year cycles?
Most municipalities that I've been working, my peer organizations appear to have strategic plans in place. So having a strategic plan in place allows them to um, provide some successes. Before I go any further, can you repeat the question, Tracey?
Just when we have these 4-year cycles, and that's mostly across Canada, except for a couple of the territories that have a different election cycle. When you've got 4-year cycles and the potential of changeover of your council, and those different council members could have a different strategic direction, every 4 years that changing, how do you maintain the momentum of continuous improvement? If you've started something, in one cycle, election cycle, and then you've got a whole change in direction the next cycle, how can you kind of maintain that momentum?
Okay, I think what I'll do to answer this question, I'm going to speak to what I did as mayor in North Frontenac, because I don't want to make suggestions about other municipalities that may be inaccurate, because a lot of different organizations have great programs, but they may not be the same one that I have. So, as I mentioned before, I worked closely with the CAO. First thing I did when I became mayor, I set up a meeting with the CAO, and we met every Friday for 3 months. And she inquired, what you want to do that for? I said, well, you and I need to get to understand each other. I don't know anything about this public sector business at all, so I need your help to understand it. I said, I have some suggestions, as you knew through my campaign, of things I want to implement it. So I want to understand what the roadblocks are of the process on how we work together to do that. That turned out to be the most valuable thing I ever did working for any organization. We had started off kind of wary of each other, but after 3 months, we decided we're going to continue it for another 3 months. What that allowed me to do was understand where our CAO was coming from, what the staff issues were, how staff worked with council and vice versa. She got to understand where I was coming from on, the need for documentation, understanding processes, how do we measure what we do, things like that. So as a result, we set up what I call as an informal organizational excellence program. We just worked on things together, presented them at council on some improvements we were doing, and had no objections to stuff we were doing. Long story short on that is once we get to an election period now, we have an excellent a program in place that everything is documented. There's a complaints processes in place, a communication plan in place, documentation for all our key processes on providing our service deliveries in place, succession plan is in place, the strategic plan and objectives in place, and financial viability and sustainability has been maintained. So when it comes to a council change, there's really no impact. Council's members, when you're campaigning, including myself when I was campaigning, I'm going to change this, I'm going to do that. And you understand once you get in there, you can't do it because of different regulations, either federally, provincially, or even locally, or the conservation authorities, environmental issues, things like that, are all things that prevent you from trying to do things that you want to do. So council member will come in, oh, hi, I'm going to do this, going to do this. But the first thing that happens when they become a new council is they're trained for a week by the CAO and the key managers. And they go through what it is they do, starting with the strategic plan, how that's linked down through the organization. And at the end, council is educated on what's going on. There was a number of people always thought, well, we have too much stuff. So we did a staff analysis. Okay, this is staff we need in order to implement the services that you, the voter, want. So here's all the staff, here's what they're working on. If you'd like us to reduce staff, which service would you like us to get rid of? So when you present the data, factual data, documented factual data, and what the impacts of that data is on each stakeholder involved with what it is you're trying to change, it becomes a very easy decision-making process. So when you have all of that stuff in place, when you get an election turnover, there really is no impact. I lost the election myself in November last year, and I've been watching the new council, and they've been basically carrying on, not skipping a beat. They're doing a great job, and just it's because the processes are in place. Now, we're not going to take full credit for this. It was already started by a previous mayor looking at strategic planning and how he measures finances. And I took it the next level over using organizational excellence. Hope that answers your question okay.
Definitely. And, even though in our previous question and your answer with respect to implementing, I think you were referring a little more to a formal excellence program. I can see with your response to this question that you went about implementing some of the excellence principles of, database decision-making and work process formalization, and those led to, higher performance for your organization. Those are ways I think that anyone in an organization can start implementing little pieces of excellence within their level of authority, and not necessarily have formal approval from their leader or the council even, and still attain higher performance for the organization. So I think that is a good example of what I was trying to get at, is that I don't believe that, you have to have that top-down formal direction in implementing excellence necessarily. And there's maybe some little ways that you can make changes along the way within your purview that will help the organization. So thank you. Thanks for sharing those examples. I think they're good examples of how you were able to, make some differences. Along that line, though, what are some of the most important activities and initiatives that municipal governments can undertake towards adopting a culture of excellence and that continuous improvement mindset?
I guess my suggestion is, if you wanted to start small, but it's a very important step, is to look at your complaints process. If you look at your complaints process, that's where the biggest issues are for council. They hate getting complaints. Everybody wants to provide service and provide it in a good manner that doesn't ruffle the feathers of the voter. That's the unfortunate part of politics. As a council member, your focus is to please the voter throughout your whole period, and you really don't focus on the staff. Well, you do. I don't want to downplay that. You have to work with staff, but you're focused primarily on eliminating complaints. If you're going to take a look at that brings into play a few tools, such as a root cause analysis program. So you need some people in to do that. Could take it one level further once you start a program and start implementing Six Sigma, but that's another topic altogether. Also look at the complaints process. How do we do it? So when you go through the process mapping, identify whether it's documented or not. How do you measure success? How do you develop trends? And how do you look at preventive actions to avoid them in the first place? So that brings in a lot of different things, right? It brings in corrective action process, documentation control, metrics, improvement programs, preventive programs, and corrective action. So that, to me, would be one way to start it. And it would provide immediate benefit for the community, for the staff, and for council. So it's a win-win-win all around. And it starts to get the program implemented. That would be a very inexpensive way for an organization to do it. It would also show a real cost-benefit analysis, because the more you eliminate issues, people get to work on more proactive activity and policies versus working on reactive things. So that's when I look at any organization, private or public, how much time is spent on reactive versus proactive. It's even 1%, that's too much. Let's address it. So a lot of people don't measure it, by the way. So that's why I look at the complaints process, because that's always a reactive versus proactive program, and it provides immediate relief.
That's great. And the other benefit to that is it can get everybody involved, right? There's complaints across the organization generally with municipal government. So that helps to get more and more people involved and spread that culture across the organization. So I like that. So shifting a little bit to a slightly different topic, but one that's very important with municipal government, especially with reduction in resources, funding, and so on, and one I know that you have some passion for, is the regionalization topic. What are some opportunities for making municipal government more effective, efficient, and less costly with respect to regionalization?
Oh my God, Tracy, that is such an obvious one. I don't understand why we're not doing it. I've tried to change it even within my own community, and I just get no, not now, and then nobody really gives me a good reason why we shouldn't do it. But I'm going to give you my perception of why. And my perception of why I don't want to do it is that, first of all, when I tried to do it here, the community didn't want to do that. Any change to representation within the community is perceived as a reduction in the service for that voter or that resident. So when I tried that, I really didn't, that one caught me off guard about I wasn't prepared for the community reaction that I got. I was prepared for council and staff, but I was not prepared from the community. Basically, they didn't want change. And once they voiced that concern, it turned council off. So there's an opportunity for anybody who wants to try that. Make sure you look at the reaction that you're going to get from the voting community if you try this in a municipal sector. However, having said that, I'm going to speak to Ontario, and I'm going to speak to North Frontenac and provide an example for that question. I'm just going to pull it up there. So within the North Frontenac area, as I mentioned before, we're a township within the community, and we're also we have 4 other townships that we work with. So 4 other: North Frontenac, Central Frontenac, South Frontenac, and Wolf Islands, and we have Kingston in between. And we also have a county council. So in the Frontenacs, we have 4 townships in one county, as I just mentioned. Here's the following number of council members we have for that, and it represents a total of 27,000 people across a huge regional area. This basically equals 1 council member for every 730 residents that we have in our municipality. In North Frontenac, we have 7 council members with about 8,000 full-time residents. 2,000 full-time residents and 6,000 seasonal residents. In Central Frontenac, they have 9 council members. Basically, their population is the same size as North Frontenac. South Frontenac, they also have 9, but they have twice as many people. Frontenac Islands has 5, but they have very few people as well. So that's a total of 30 council members for the township of 27,000 people, 7 on the Frontenac County. So Frontenac County is made up of council members from each township, 2 from each township. And then a warden is elected as well. So it's a grand total of 37 politicians that the taxpayers are paying for. It's time, in my mind, it's time to amalgamate townships and get back to reducing the costs and provide some more value for what's being done. There's no need to have that many council members running a township. However, having said that, it's going to be a huge challenge, and one that just wasn't up to fulfilling. I think what needs to happen is at the provincial level, a case would have to be made from an organizational excellence perspective on looking what the processes are and look across the whole province and using the program, using the report I developed that identifies councils and what the representation is, what the cost is, and what the cost benefits are of reducing that to the taxpayer overall. It would be a huge number. I'm not sure if I have that number. Yes, it was $750,000 in the first year that we would save in our community. $750,000 would do a lot for helping seniors in our community, things like that. So if I was to do that and amalgamate it, if I was to do that all over again, I'd do a better job on identifying what the benefits are for the community members themselves. I focused on staff and council. If I was going to do it again, I'd focus on the benefits of the community. And in that way, I think it would provide a much better case to be accepted to reduce it. When if organizational OEF as an example, they're using the organizational framework through the organization, a professional group. If they were to provide a case to provincial governments or even to municipalities, providing looking at the organizations and doing analysis similar to what I just described there, and provide the benefits, and also include an excellence program as part of using the benefits of reducing costs, be one way of reducing costs across the organizations, not impacting the taxes of the community, providing the same level of service, and at the same time, the money that's freed up can be used to provide an organizational excellence, a formal training implementation program that organizations, municipalities can implement. Does that answer your question, Tracey?
Yes, mostly. I guess I'm, fascinated to hear that your experience is similar to one that I've been involved with here, as well as other case studies that I've read about with other provinces. And, it's just interesting to learn that the cost and benefits are almost less important to people than their representation or their perception of what's going to happen to their say in the big picture. If amalgamation were to happen, giving up that that representation seems to be very sensitive for them. And I think I agree with you with respect to the communication and education of people from the onset is really important, and getting them to a position where they understand all of the benefits to do with regionalization before they're asked to participate in any decision making around that. I think that's really quite important. But I don't know, it seems that there's even more to it than that that change issue is huge. And I'm not sure what it's going to take. And I hate to see the answer be provincial mandating of regionalization. Some provinces, that's what it's taken for them to effect those changes. But what would be, I think, more impactful is if these municipalities and regions could understand the benefit and buy in to making that happen, and everybody having a say in how that's carried out. So it'll be.
I think it could be done, Tracey. I think it could be done. It just needs a real solid business case, if you will, that's going to provide everything in a lot more detail than what I just described here, but do a real good cost benefit analysis of amalgamation, and also include, or it's not just about amalgamation. Amalgamation it's a bad word when you talk to anybody in the community about amalgamation. So I don't want to change the word, because amalgamation is what it is. What you want to do is amalgamate to provide more collaboration across the community and provide better opportunities for better service delivery while reducing costs and provide more benefits to the community as a whole. So it just needs that kind of real good business case. It can be done. It'll take some effort, but I would love to have a municipality to try that out on, because it can work, and it would be just a great example of what can be done in that regard.
Yeah, and I guess, in movement towards those concepts, are there any alternatives to formal amalgamation? Could municipalities achieve regional benefits without amalgamating?
Um, Collaboration across municipalities is very difficult. We're all focused on our specific municipalities. We have some similar issues, but we have some specific issues in each of our municipalities. So collaboration is already in play at the county level, if I can say that, because at least in Ontario it is. At the county level, we'll call it the upper tier municipality within our electoral area, made up of the 4 townships. So the council is made up of the council members of the 4 townships. And at that table, we're supposed to be representing each of our townships at a broader scale in a collaborative manner at the county level. Sounds good, but it doesn't always work. We all have our own opinions on things, or we look at the information and data being presented to us in a different way than my colleague next to me might be looking at it. And that's fair. And that's the beauty of councils, is having diversified opinions. However, trying to implement collaboration versus amalgamation to reduce costs and provide better value, I don't see that working. And then the first, collaboration doesn't reduce the number of staff or council members in Frontenac County. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention when I was going through the amalgamation report I did, I mentioned council members, but there are also 5 CAOs, one at each level of the government, 5 treasurers, 5 this, 5 that. So it's not just duplications, it's fiflication, if there's such a word. It's 5 times that. So in the program, what I identified, there would be no layoffs or people losing job. The way you implement it is through attrition. And you can pay through that through some of the savings you make. You just reassign them to other jobs, and as people leave, you just backfill internally until that program has been addressed. So collaboration still has the costs involved on the public sector level, and I don't see it working. It does work at, so the CAOs, as an example, we meet once a month as CAOs. That works well. They all have the similar issues, and they work on issues that are only similar to them. And that works well. Same with public works managers, same with fire department. They work in collaboration. So I guess my short answer to your question is no, I don't think there is another way. Nice to be if there was, but I don't think it would work near as
To
well
get
as
the full
amalgamation.
benefits, there needs to be a full amalgamation.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you, Ron. I like to always finish my podcast with my final question, which is, how do you remain in the growth zone? In other words, what do you do to maintain and deepen your growth mindset?
I always volunteer for things. I'm, as you can see, white hair. I'm in my 70s now, so I've slowed down on the consulting, but I always stay informed. And I always go to organizational excellence on LinkedIn to keep up to date on things. And I'm not saying that because we're having a chat here today. I've literally done that for the last, well, since organizational excellence started way back in the day with Don and myself and a few others when we first started talking about this. When Don set up the LinkedIn, I go there a lot, even as mayor. And that's really good information, especially with podcasts that you do. The information coming from other members of organizational excellence seems to be the best spot for keeping up to date. The National Quality Institute isn't as prevalent as it used to be. ISO 9000 and the ISO standards are sort of taking a back seat. And I think organizational excellence is the present and the future. And it's going to be more prominent in the future. And wish more public sector and private sector understood that. I think as a whole, Canada could be much better. So anyway, that's how I keep up to date. And I always read, keep to date on news items, what's happening in the business world, what's happening at the public sector world. So I spend an hour each day going through different reports, LinkedIn and things like that, and then have my coffee, start my day, and away I go.
That's awesome. Well, it was a pleasure speaking with you today, Ron. I really appreciate you sharing your expertise and your wisdom with our audience, and hope people can take something away from our discussion. And thank you.
And hopefully, thanks very much for the opportunity. Keep up the good work, and hope if anybody has any questions, they can contact you, and away we go.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you very much.